This is Charleston, the home of Bloomsbury Group artists Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant. Born in the late Victorian era, they were part of a pre-war cultural movement that helped shape Britain's avant-garde in the early 20th century. Today, Charleston is a museum devoted to collecting and celebrating their iconic modern art and vibrant domestic design. It was in this studio that Bell and Grant created many of their individual works, and also collaborated on the famous Women Dinner Service, which has recently returned to Charleston. This set of 50 plates bearing portraits of individual women from history was made by Bell and Grant for their patron, the art historian Kenneth Clark, in the early 1930s. Clark was taken aback by this design scheme when the set was delivered, but letters show that his wife Jane Clark played an important role in managing the commission. Having remained in a private collection until 2018, until now the plates were hidden from view. Their semi-mythological status was sustained by a few grainy pictures from the 1930s, tantalizing allusions in the archives, and preparatory designs dispersed in private collections. As one of the first researchers to access the set, I was immediately excited by its clear resonances with later iconic feminist artworks, namely The Dinner Party by Judy Chicago. I was also fascinated by how the lives of most of the women depicted by Bell and Grant reflected the new sexual politics at the heart of Bloomsbury aesthetics and ways of living. In this film, I visit Judy Chicago at the Brooklyn Museum in New York, where The Dinner Party is on permanent view. In conversation with her and creators of Regina China, the Women's Art League, we explore the connections between feminist critique, domestic design, conviviality, and gender politics that are highlighted by these striking ceramic works.
I'm Judy Chicago, and this is The Dinner Party, a symbolic history of women in Western civilization that has been permanently housed at the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum for 10 years. Before that, the dinner party traveled around the world to 6 countries, 3 continents, to a viewing audience of over 1 million people. And since its permanent housing, there have been another 1.5 million viewers. The reason I'm saying that is that it helps to accomplish the goal I set when I started work on the dinner party in 1974, which was to teach a broad and diverse audience about the richness of women's history. The dinner party is structured as a walk through the history of Western civilization as I learned it in school, instead of male heroes representing prehistory, the Greek and Roman period, the Egyptian period, the beginning of Judaism. Each of those epochs is represented by a woman who is presented in an abstract portrait on a plate. The plates sit on needleworked runners done in the needlework technique of the time in which the woman lived. As you walk around the dinner party table, the plates rise up to symbolize the increasing struggle for liberation waged by the different women on the dinner party table. Grouped around each of the women on the table, the names of 999 other women who made a mark on history, streaming out from under the place setting to represent the tradition of achievement represented by the woman on the table. The dinner party and the story it tells are told in layers. The plates, the runners, the streams of names, and the backs of the runners. So if you walk around the table, you get the story of women's history told through women who contributed to Western civilization. I can't remember when I first heard about the famous women plates. I understood them as an antecedent representing women. I think it's great they've come into view. What interests me is the historic continuity of unearthing and honoring women, unearthing and subverting imagery, which I did in the dinner party. I used a lot of art historical themes and subverted them to celebrate women. And also the historic continuity from the famous women plates to the dinner party, where the imagery was so unbelievably shocking to people, to Regina China, where whenever anybody says to me about anything about the dinner party, I burst into laughter and I say, have you been on Instagram? Have you ever noticed Regina China and Club Clitoris? I mean, give me a break. The dinner party is fairly modest in comparison. I mean, for me, the vulva or vaginal imagery in the dinner party, if you think about these women who are represented, they cross centuries, professions, class, orientation, religion. They have nothing in common except that most of them were unknown because they all had vaginas. So one aspect of the imagery escaped most critics' perception, that is that it's a critique of patriarchal culture and the way in which history has been written.
The gift of the dinner party to the Brooklyn Museum is actually what started the Sackler Center, and we just celebrated our 10th anniversary. The Brooklyn Museum was one of the original museums to join the tour of the dinner party when it traveled from 1979 to 1988. And so it's been here in 1980, 2002, and for the past 10 years.
The idea of sitting down and talking to women and inviting people to the table, it's just such a generative idea that we can all come around a table like we are right now and just talk and look and feel. And I think that's the dinner party, even for people who come to visit it, who know it, there's still that moment where you just take your breath away seeing the installation, and that in itself is such an inversion of the domestic, the expected intimacy. They take the domestic object and amplify it to this incredible scale.
It's almost a religious experience, seeing it with the chalices and
absolutely.
the presentation.
We talk a lot about why Judy, who specifically was raised in a progressive sort of secular but Jewish household, why she really used a lot of these emblems and accessories of very Christian, sometimes Judeo-Christian honoring of male gods. And for her, it was all about that subversion. So all about your body is primed to know, because we're such good citizens and consumers of society and images, that this is special. But then rather than see men at the center, all of a sudden you're experiencing the lives of women. And it's such a radical thing, sadly.
Regina China is a collaborative artwork, and our goal is to celebrate women and to demystify the vulva. Our deeper mission is to use art as a tool to engage in conversations that address societal issues affecting women. We chose plates because we wanted to bring awareness to our lineage, the work that had come before us. The only reason we're able to do this work now is because of the women that have been bringing so much attention to this part of the body.
And plates as our objects of domesticity. We look at them every day. We feel intimately engaged with them. They're very familiar to us. And we also thought about China and how much it means. It conveys so much information about a family status, whoever picks out the China, which is usually the women of the family. And it's often passed down through the generations. But they pick out China that conveys information about the family and transmits that, what's important to them and what's valued. But we really like the idea of it also being in your face.
Absolutely. And held in a place of honor.
Yeah.
I think there's a really productive tension between all of these services in that they take a very domestic form and both radicalise the home life of it and also the public presentation of it.
We envision it being mounted on a wall instead of a table. We want to play with how in the home oftentimes people have arranged china on the wall in unique configurations. Oftentimes grandmas.
So like the ducks.
Yeah, we want the viewer to come into the room and see from afar this really interesting pattern and then come up closer to it and see what the content of it is and become curious and learn more about what each set is about.
Prior to probably the 19th century, the only way a woman artist or a woman writer could really talk about female experience directly was to use the existing structures of the time. For example, earlier on the table is a place setting for Artemisia Gentileschi, the Baroque painter who had to use traditional themes and to subvert them in order to express her own experiences. By the time Virginia Woolf and Georgia O'Keeffe were working, they could actually invent forms to express their experiences. I selected each of the women at the table for a particular symbolic reason. So for Virginia Woolf, I wanted to return to some of the early goddess imagery because those early plays talk about female power. I wanted that to break open and rise up as Virginia Woolf struggled from out of the shadow of patriarchy. Her plate sits on a runner. These are embroidered waves, which of course refer to her famous book and also the fact that she walked into the water when she could no longer deal with reality and the fact that fascism was marching across Europe, and she described the Nazis as patriarchy gone mad, and we are experiencing our own moment of patriarchy gone mad in America. I knew who Vanessa Bell was. I knew she was a very under-recognized artist, and probably when she and Duncan Grant were working, they wouldn't have had access to a lot of information about earlier women artists. So, for example, when I was researching for the dinner party, I found information about a lot of women artists buried, but by the time I did the last dinner party book, there had been 20 years of feminist art historical research, and a lot of women artists had been unearthed, so it was quite a lot easier to find women artists than it would have been then.
Working with ceramics is very temperamental, and as the project evolves, our style is continuing to evolve. And so we have some of our originals and some that have blown up quite recently. And so we're like, oh, maybe we should be keeping some of these. So I appreciate your work.
Thank you. And I mean, sometimes I give tours of the dinner party, people will ask, oh, so can I buy them? So people even read the dinner party as, since it's ceramics, commercial. Like there's this weird illusion there between what people understand to be a unique artwork. Even the needleworkers would come out of the loft to look to see the moment that the kiln was being opened and to see that stress. And you know, then to think to the famous women set of how these items, in that case, were totally lived with and really just a part of daily life, which is kind of a flip side of when we go to see the dinner party and there's stanchions and we can't touch it, and the fact that people still come to the museum and say, are those available? Are they commercial? So there's, just something interesting there.
One thing that's been interesting about the famous women is that the only public record that we had of them were the test plates and some preliminary sketches for it, as well as a bunch of correspondence that's come to light from the Yale Centre for British Art between Vanessa Bell and Jane Clark. And it's those kind of glimpses that have kind of kept it alive, so that when I became aware that the famous women were now in the public realm, that made me aware that this was something that had a fantastic history to it and so much resonance with the lineage of feminist art and art history and these great projects that you're undertaking at the moment as well. And let me put those connections together. It was that archival trail of materials. Each of these sets subversively points to the lack of imagery that represents female experience. Their methods speak to unique moments in history. Bell and Grant painted vivid interpretations of historical portraits. As a second-wave feminist, Chicago created a powerful and feminine symbolic order. And in the era of the Pussy Hat, the Women's Art League casts the body itself. Collectively, they demonstrate the potential of collaborative artistic projects to offer powerful, alternative depictions of women's histories and bodies.